For a long time, I believed that some things belonged exclusively to the realm of fantasy, legends, or at most, the stories that elders told to scare or comfort. I grew up hearing that science had answers for everything, until the day my own body began to wither, and I realized, in the cruelest way possible, that not even medicine, with all its technology and knowledge, could always offer a way out. It was at that moment, when everything seemed lost, that I met Pachita, a simple woman of ordinary appearance, but whose deeds bordered on the impossible. She didn't just change my life, she redefined everything I thought I knew about reality. What if I told you that what happened to me was only the tip of the iceberg? That there's a much bigger, darker, and more complex story hidden between the lines of our very existence? A story that involves science, spirituality, powers that defy logic, and the disappearance of one of Mexico's greatest neuroscience geniuses, Jacobo Grinberg. But after all, what really happened to Jacobo Grinberg? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver the videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's go to the video. You know, I never imagined that one day I would be forced to choose between accepting death or believing in the impossible. And I'm not exaggerating. When the doctors looked me in the eyes and told me there was nothing more they could do, I felt as if the ground simply vanished beneath my feet. It's a hard feeling to describe, as if suddenly everything you believed in, science, medicine, logic, stopped making sense. And what's left? Only fear. Fear, and one last spark of hope, even if it seemed absurd. It was in that desperation that someone told me about Pachita. At first, I thought it was a joke. An old lady who performed psychic surgeries with rusty knives? What kind of madness was that? But when death is a certainty, any chance, no matter how unlikely it seems, becomes valuable. And driven by this mix of disbelief and desperation, I decided to look for her. After all, what did I have to lose? I remember perfectly the first time I saw her house. An old 2-story building, worn down by time, hidden on a narrow street full of old cars and wires hanging everywhere. On the outside, it just looked like another forgotten building in Mexico City. But when I crossed that door, the feeling was immediate. The air felt heavier. There was the smell of incense, burning herbs, and a strange silence, as if that place was out of time, out of reality. Have you ever felt something like that? Inside the house, I found people. Lots of people. Faces marked by pain, fear, and hope. There were children, elderly, mothers with eyes swollen from crying so much. They were all there for one reason: to seek what medicine had denied them. And I confess, seeing all of that left me even more torn. Part of me screamed that this was charlatanism. Another part desperately wanted it to be real. When I finally saw Pachita, I must admit I was surprised. She wasn't what I imagined. She didn't wear mystical clothes, didn't look like a guru, nor did she have that theatrical posture that many healers display. She was an ordinary elderly woman, with dark eyes that seemed to look straight into you. There was something about her, something I couldn't explain. A strong presence, almost magnetic. Was it just suggestion? Was my fragile mind creating that? Or was there something more? She welcomed me, as if she had known me for years. Her voice was calm, almost maternal. She asked me to sit down, held my hands, and without me saying a single word, she began to describe exactly what I had. And she described everything with a precision that sent chills down my spine. How did she know? Who told her? But looking into her eyes, I realized she wasn't guessing. She simply knew. The ritual began minutes later. She laid me on a simple table, placed clean cloths around, and lit some more incense. Beside her, a small box with knives. Ordinary knives, old, even rusty. Nothing there seemed sterilized. No medical equipment. No monitor, no gloves. Only Pachita, and that which, until then, I couldn't comprehend. And deep down, I asked myself, how could something like this work? And if it worked, how was it possible? She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then began murmuring words in a language I had never heard before. A mix of sounds, chants, vibrations that seemed to echo in the very air. That's when things started to change. The room got colder. The lights, already dim, began to flicker. And suddenly, an absolute silence took over the room. No noise from outside. No sound of cars, people, or the city. As if we were isolated in another place. Pachita then grabbed one of the knives. She held it firmly, and with movements that seemed impossible, began to cut my body. I saw her gestures. I saw her opening, moving, as if she were removing things that didn't belong there. But there was no pain, no blood, no cuts. It was as if my body was made of something she could pass through, manipulate, and somehow fix. How could this be real? When she finished, she placed her hands over my chest and, once again, began speaking in that strange language. Gradually, the room returned to normal. The cold disappeared. The lights stopped flickering. And when I stood up, I knew that something had changed inside me. I can't explain how or why, but I knew that, on that day, something died within me. Not my life, but my old view of reality. The days that followed that ritual were, to say the least, strange. My body felt different. I woke up feeling light, energized, like I hadn't felt in months. But at the same time, something was unsettling me. It wasn't just the physical healing. It was as if my perception of reality was different. And it's hard to explain this to someone who's never experienced something like that. How do you explain the invisible? How do you translate what has no name, no shape? But that period of peace didn't last long. Because a few weeks later, two figures walked through Pachita's door. And I swear, from the very first moment, I felt that nothing would ever be the same again. One of them was a middle-aged man, serious appearance, intense gaze, carrying a backpack full of notebooks, recorders, and instruments I didn't even know the purpose of. The other, younger, had an easy smile, but there was something strange about that smile. The older one introduced himself, Jacobo Grinberg. At the time, I had no idea who he was. Only later did I understand that this man was no ordinary person. Jacobo was one of Mexico's greatest neuroscientists. A genius. He dedicated his life to studying the limits of consciousness, the mind, and the perception of reality. And yes, he was there to understand Pachita. To understand if somehow what she did could be explained, mapped, or even replicated. But what about the other one? The one named Mercer. From the very first second, my instincts set off an alarm. There was something wrong. I don't know if you've ever felt that about someone. That impression that the person isn't exactly there for the reason they say. That there's a second layer, a hidden intention behind the gestures, the looks, the carefully chosen words. That's exactly what I felt every time I looked at him. That day, Jacobo was visibly skeptical. He walked around the room analyzing everything. He noted every detail. He asked questions. He tried to understand how someone with no medical training could conduct procedures that defied any manual of modern science. And deep down, I wondered, did he really believe he would find rational answers there? Had he not yet understood that this simply didn't fit into the boxes of logic? Mercer, on the other hand, was different. He seemed attentive to everything, but not in the same way as Jacobo. His gaze wasn't that of a curious researcher. It was that of someone who is mapping, recording, observing not only what Pachita did, but also how, when, and with whom. And that gave me a sense of unease that I couldn't ignore. After all, who really was that man? The ritual that day would be different. A woman had arrived, given up on, terminal tumor. I had already seen Pachita reverse things like that, and even so, every time it felt like the first. The environment began to change as it always did. Lights flickering, the smell of incense growing stronger, the air denser, colder. And there, before the eyes of two men who came to represent the world of reason, science, and skepticism, the impossible unfolded once again. Jacobo observed every movement, taking notes frantically, as if that could be translated into numbers, graphs, formulas. And in a way, I understood. After all, isn't that exactly what we do when something challenges us? We try to understand. We try to put it into words, into diagrams. But how do you explain something that doesn't belong to this world? How do you translate into science something that operates between the lines of reality? Mercer, in contrast, didn't write anything down. He just observed. And it wasn't normal observation. His eyes scanned not just Pachita, but everything. The environment, the expressions, the objects, as if he were storing information not to learn, but to use in some other way. And the more I noticed that, the more an uncomfortable question grew inside me. What, in fact, was that man doing there? When the ritual ended, once again, successfully, I saw something I will never forget. Jacobo was in shock. And I'm not talking about mere surprise. It was real shock, as if everything he had believed his entire life was, at that exact moment, collapsing right before his eyes. And next to him, Mercer was smiling. But it wasn't a smile of wonder, nor of amazement. It was another kind of smile, one that, to this day, makes me shudder just remembering it. As the days went by, the presence of Jacobo and Mercer became something routine in that house. They came and went, asked questions, observed, took notes. Jacobo seemed increasingly immersed in trying to decipher all of it. His eyes carried a strange mixture of fascination and discomfort, as if he were hanging between two worlds, the one he had always believed in, and the one that, against all logic, was revealing itself right in front of him. But Mercer was different, and with each passing day my suspicion grew. It wasn't just a feeling. There was something profoundly wrong about him. His gestures were rehearsed, his smile fake. He seemed like an actor playing a role, and no matter how hard he tried to appear relaxed, attentive, interested, something just didn't fit. Has that ever happened to you? Looking at someone and feeling, deep down, that they're not there for the reason they say? The breaking point came one random afternoon. I was organizing some materials in the back when, through the window, I saw Mercer leaving the house in a hurry. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't look back. He walked fast, glancing around like someone who doesn't want to be seen, and at the same time making sure he wasn't being followed. At least, that's what he thought. In that instant, my body reacted before my mind. I dropped everything I was doing and instinctively started following him. And I confess, part of me was screaming not to do it, not to get involved. But how could I just ignore it? How could I pretend I didn't see? How could I close my eyes when everything inside me was telling me that something was profoundly wrong? Mercer walked like someone who knew those streets very well. He cut corners, went through narrow alleys, followed paths that I, living there for months, had never noticed. And the more I followed him, the more that mix of fear and curiosity grew inside me. What was he doing? Who's he going to meet? And why? After a few minutes, he stopped. And what I saw froze me in place. Two men were waiting for him. Tall, dressed in black suits. They looked like they had stepped straight out of some conspiracy movie. Serious, expressionless, and even though it was already nighttime, both were wearing dark sunglasses. Strange? No. Disturbing. I hid behind a wall, not daring to move. Mercer approached them, and although I couldn't clearly hear what they were saying, I could sense the disguised nervousness in his gestures. They talked for a few minutes. One of the men handed him an envelope. Discreet. Quick. Mercer checked the contents, slipped it into his jacket, and for a moment, looked directly in my direction. My heart nearly stopped. Did he see me? But apparently not. He looked around, made sure no one was there, or thought no one was, and started walking back the same way. I waited. I waited until I was sure he was far enough away, and only then did I have the courage to breathe again. What was that? Who were those men? And above all, what was Mercer doing with them? I got back to the house before he did, pretending everything was normal, but my mind was racing. My heart pounding, my hands sweating cold. I knew that wasn't just a random meeting. It wasn't something innocent. It wasn't a coincidence. And in that moment, a certainty formed inside me, as clear as it was painful. Mercer was not who he claimed to be. I needed answers. And if he wasn't going to give them to me, then I would have to extract those answers one way or another. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every detail of that scene in the alley, every gesture, every look from Mercer and those men. The questions pounded in my head, as if my own mind was trying to warn me that I was about to cross a line from which, maybe, I could never return. But what if I did nothing? What if I just pretended I hadn't seen it? Could I live with that doubt eating away at my chest for the rest of my life? The next morning, I made a decision. I needed to confront Mercer. I needed to look him in the eyes and once and for all, understand who he really was and what he wanted there. I waited for the right moment. When he stepped away from the main room, I followed. I called him, using the most neutral tone I could manage, and asked for his help organizing some things in the back room. As always, he maintained that polite smile, that perfect servant demeanor, and unsuspecting, he followed me. As soon as we entered the room, I closed the door behind us. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the beats in my own ears. Without thinking much, or maybe thinking too much, I grabbed one of the machetes Pachita used in the rituals and, with a trembling hand, pressed it against his neck. I had never done anything like that, never imagined I was capable. But at that moment, fear turned into courage. Or madness. Have you ever felt that? That point where the fear is so overwhelming that you simply break through it. Talk. Who are those men? Who are you really? What do you want here? My voice came out firmer than I expected. But inside, I was falling apart. What happened next was perhaps what disturbed me the most. Mercer didn't panic. He didn't get nervous. He didn't try to run. He simply took a deep breath. And with a calmness that scared me more than any scream could have, he slowly moved his hand toward the inner pocket of his jacket. I almost pressed the machete, but he raised his other hand, signaling he wasn't going to make any sudden moves. From his pocket, he pulled out a black leather wallet. He opened it slowly, as if he wanted me to see every detail. And when he showed it, my entire body froze. There, right in front of my eyes, was an official badge. With a seal, hologram, everything. CIA agent. He stared at me serious. The smile had disappeared. In its place, only a cold expression, almost mechanical. I work for the United States government. We're monitoring Jacobo Grinberg. We're not here because of Pachita. At least, not directly. The words pounded in my head. Monitoring? Grinberg? But why? Mercer took a deep breath and, before I could say anything, continued. What you've seen here, what this woman does, isn't just of interest to mystics, charlatans, or the curious. This goes beyond any spiritual or scientific concept. If what Grinberg is trying to prove is real, we're talking about something that completely changes everything the world knows as reality. And my friend, the world is not ready for that. I didn't know whether to believe it. I didn't know if it was true, or just another well-rehearsed lie. But before I could process any of it, Mercer lowered his voice and said a sentence that, to this day, echoes in my nightmares. The truth isn't something people want. It's something they need to never discover. And that's when I realized that I was completely inside something much bigger, much darker, and much more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The tension from that conversation lingered in the air for the rest of the day. I could no longer look at Mercer the same way. In fact, I couldn't look at anyone the same way anymore. Because when you realize that things aren't exactly what they seem, everything changes. People, places, even silence carries a different weight. Have you ever felt that? As if suddenly what you called reality began to crack, and behind those cracks, something much bigger and far more terrifying started to peek through. And if I thought that was the peak of horror, I was wrong. Because what came next, there simply aren't enough words to describe. I was in the kitchen, organizing a few things, trying to pretend everything was normal, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Mercer was there, preparing a cup of tea for Pachita. So far, nothing unusual. He did that often. The problem is that he wasn't alone. In his hands, he was holding a small bottle, a dark liquid, and right in front of my eyes, I saw him pour a few drops into the cup. For a moment, I froze. My brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. No, that couldn't be. I was imagining things, right? It was just exhaustion, paranoia, wasn't it? But no, I knew. I felt it. Something told me, in the most visceral way possible, that this wasn't my imagination. It was real, and it was happening right in front of me. I rushed out of there as fast as I could, hands shaking, chest tight. I ran to the room where Pachita was resting, exhausted after an entire day of healing. And before she could even touch the cup, I practically screamed, "Don't drink that! Don't touch it!" She looked at me confused. Her eyes, which always carried that almost supernatural serenity, now narrowed with doubt and concern. "Why? What's wrong?" she asked, looking at me, then at Mercer, who entered the room at that exact moment, holding the cup. And that was the moment when the masks fell. Mercer's smile vanished. Without any warning, he pulled a gun from inside his jacket and pointed it straight at Pachita's head. The image, that image, burned into my memory like a scar that will never heal. Have you ever seen death looking someone straight in the eyes? I have. She drinks it, or you die in her place. Choose. Now. His voice had no emotion, no anger, no hatred, just emptiness. The kind of emptiness only someone who has crossed lines that should never be crossed carries within themselves. For a second, I thought it was over, that this was the end. But in a way that I still can't explain, Pachita remained calm, as if she already knew, as if, somehow, she had always known that this moment would come. With a calm voice, one that contrasted almost supernaturally with the weight of the scene, she said, "It's okay. I will drink it. Don't fear, my child. Everything will be all right. I wanted to stop her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do anything. But I couldn't. I felt the barrel of the gun press against my head. And in an act that still destroys me inside to this day, all I could do was watch as Pachita raised the cup to her lips. As soon as the liquid touched her mouth, her eyes closed. Her body gave in, and she collapsed like a candle that goes out when the wind blows too hard. I ran. I held her in my arms, calling her, begging, crying. But at that moment, everything seemed lost. Everything. And then something absolutely impossible happened. In the middle of that despair, in the middle of that pain, I felt a presence. Something or someone was there. I looked up, and what I saw simply didn't belong to this world. In that instant, I understood that everything we thought we knew about reality was an illusion. Because right before my eyes stood something that defied any definition, any belief, any limit. A being that was not human. Cuauhtémoc. The very same that, for years, had been the true force behind Pachita's miracles. And in that silent encounter, where words seemed unnecessary, I understood that there are things that were never meant to be explained. And maybe not even meant to be discovered. Because knowing has a price. A price that Jacobo also paid. A price that, to this day, echoes in the shadows of history, without almost anyone noticing. And today, after everything I've lived through, after everything I've lost, and after everything that has been erased from history, I tell you, I am the last one left. The last one who knows the truth. The last one who carries the weight of a secret that should never have come to light. And maybe, just maybe, by hearing this, you'll start noticing the signs too. Because the question was never whether this is real. The question that still echoes in the silence of the world is, are we really alone? Or has the truth always been here, hidden right in front of us? This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because after all, more voices mean more discoveries.